Term flying saucer. On June 24, 1977, 30 years to the day after he first sighted them, Ken Arnold consented to speak to us. He had refused to make any public statements for the last 5 years. It's easy to see that after 30 years, he's still angry at the disbelief.
All right, here we've seen something, I've seen something, hundreds of pilots have seen something in the skies. We have dutifully reported these things. And we have to have 15 million witnesses before anybody's going to look into the problem seriously? Why, this is utterly fantastic. This is more fantastic than flying saucers or people from Venus or anything, as far as I'm concerned.
July the 24th, 1948, two experienced commercial pilots, Clarence Childs and John Whitehead, were flying at night over Alabama when they encountered what they described as a cigar-shaped object, perhaps 100 feet long, flying faster than any aircraft they had ever seen. It had, they said, 2 rows of windows and they could see lights inside, and orange-red flames shooting out of the tail.
During that evening, there was a third witness. The one passenger who was awake on that Eastern Airlines flight, Clarence McKelvey.
I was startled, frightened. A male steward came to me and said, "I notice you've been looking out the window. Will you talk to the pilot?" And I said, "Well, of course." The pilot came down with his clipboard. He was visibly shaken. He told me that he had been a flyer in the war and had covered so many million miles of flight and had never seen anything like this before. What was it that I saw? Well, I saw this object. It was cigar-shaped. It had a row of windows. Behind them, it was lit. Out of the rear was a cherry red flame.
This hair-raising experience was witnessed by 3 aircraft, a passenger, and ground observers added more corroboration. The conclusion of an air intelligence report was that the object remains unidentified as to origin, construction, and power source, and goes into the record classified as unknown.
Air Force investigators couldn't explain it.
It could not possibly fly unless it had an engine in it that was beyond anything anybody on Earth could make.
The Air Force investigators trusted the testimony of these experienced pilots and were forced to consider the incredible. The investigators said the Earth was being visited by alien spaceships.
They took it so seriously that they risked their own careers by writing an estimate of the situation that they sent on to higher headquarters and said that UFOs, some of these UFOs could be extraterrestrial, which of course was not received well by the Pentagon.
Hoyt Vandenberg looked at this thing and he said, "I cannot accept this."
The eyewitness accounts from experienced pilots were not enough for the general. The Air Force wanted the flying saucer phenomena to go away, but the popular fascination with mysterious flying objects was growing.
According to the United States Air Force, in following a policy which is set probably fairly high in the Pentagon, there are about 250 or 300 extremely incompetent airline and military pilots in this country. They're carrying passengers, they fly across the oceans, and they seem to be quite safe. The airlines let them continue to fly, even though they have reported UFOs. Now, this is not an attack on the Air Force spokesman or the project spokesman. They are simply following orders to explain away all UFO sightings as quickly as possible when they become public and deny that UFOs really exist.
I understand, Major Kehoe, that like physicist Stanton Friedman, you believe that we are being visited by intelligently controlled vehicles from other planets.
I do, and I agree with the Air Force. They've had a secret conclusion to that effect since 1948.
To the flying saucer they both saw while piloting a plane between Little Rock and Memphis. Here's the strange story. Believe it or not.
We feel definitely that it was a controlled aircraft of some type. Don't you think so?
I think it had to be. What was the first thing that really drew your attention to it being probably a flying saucer, Jack?
Well, the circular pattern of light that were arranged under what I term the underneath side of the ship as it passed in front of us and across our path. I'm not inclined to believe that it's anything that from some far place, some planet. I am of the opinion that we will know what this disc or saucer is in the near future.
as an example of the credible type of sightings reported by reputable, trained observers was the report of Captain Willis Sperry.
What is your full name, Captain?
Captain Willis Sperry.
How long with American Airlines?
17 years.
Well, what was the date of sighting?
May the 29th, 1950.
And the time of sighting?
9:30 in the evening.
The origin of sighting?
60 miles southwest of Washington, D.C.
And the destination?
Nashville, Tennessee.
What was the visibility?
It was unlimited.
What was your altitude?
7,500 feet.
Who of the crew first saw the object?
The co-pilot called it to my attention as I had turned to reach for a map. The object was flying head-on at us. It was 50 times the magnitude of the brightest star. I immediately made an abrupt turn to avoid collision. As I looked to my left, the object appeared to come to a stop.
Can you describe the shape of the object?
It appeared as a perfectly streamlined object without wings or tail section, as it was silhouetted against the full moon. At all times, it had a brilliant, shimmering blue light in the nose. It was traveling at fantastic speed, and although it had passed off our left wingtip, it circled us in a matter of seconds and appeared off our right wing. There again, it stopped, and we watched it for several seconds. When again it started, it reversed its direction. We watched it for several more seconds until it disappeared in the east out of sight.
Have you ever seen any other similar object, Captain?
Never before or since.
On a clear night in February of 1951, Lieutenant Graham Bethune sat at the controls of a U.S. Navy transport plane en route from Iceland to America. The flight was routine until Bethune spotted a strange group of lights below his aircraft.
And we were at 10,000 feet, and this was about 15 miles away. It came up to us like that, just about that fast. And of course, I disengaged the autopilot to put the nose over. I thought we'd be able to go under this thing and not collide with it. And when I did, it's staring me in the face, and you couldn't see anything out the cockpit. We could tell it was a monster about 300 feet in diameter. As it drifted out to our right, we could see the dome.
According to Lieutenant Bethune, the object remained in this position for about a minute. It then accelerated rapidly and disappeared above the horizon. Upon landing at an air base in Newfoundland, he was debriefed and interrogated by several officers from Naval Intelligence. At the conclusion, he was ordered to never speak about this incident again.
You accept anything like that simply because you're in the military, and that's your job, is defending the country, and whatever they tell you to do, you do.
The identity of the group responsible for imposing the secrecy around the UFO issue was revealed to Lieutenant Bethune several months later in a conversation with an officer from Naval Intelligence.
And I asked him the question, I said, what happens to this report? Where does it go? He said it goes to Navy Intelligence, Chief Naval Operations, then it goes to a Joint Intelligence Committee. Now, of course, later on, I learned that it was MAJIC, which is Majority Agency of Joint Intelligence. Now, he said this was a small committee, but this committee determined whether it would affect our national security, that if it did, it would probably never go anywhere else.
In October 1952, at an airfield in Gloucestershire, an RAF flying instructor took off on a routine training flight. It was his third flight of the day, and everything was business as usual.
We climbed up through some clouds, and we broke through it at about 14,000 feet. I was somewhat alarmed to see, right in front of the aircraft, framed in the windscreen, 3 circular white discs. And I thought, my goodness.
Mick suddenly said to me, David, did you have anything to drink at lunchtime? And I said, no. He said, well, take a look right ahead.
I grabbed the control and turned the aircraft away to one side.
As they moved out and got further apart, they began to look as if they were that sort of, this is a magnifying lens, but they were that sort of shape.
Even for a trained pilot with 7 years of flying experience, this was an unusual and disturbing incident.
Frightened, yes, and I was subsequently told that when I got down from the aircraft cockpit, that I looked somewhat shaken, almost as if I'd seen a ghost.
Swinney and Croft's sighting was also picked up by a local radar station.
They could see clearly 3 unidentified blips on their tube. Now that surely is a bit unusual.
This is among the first of Britain's officially recorded and documented UFO sightings. Pilots are required to fill out reports for each flight in a logbook. This is Michael Swinney's. His entry reads, 3 flying saucers sighted at height, confirmed by GCI, meaning radar. But David Crofts was cautious in his entry.
I felt that if someone picked up my logbook and saw that I had written that I'd seen unidentified flying objects, they'd think I was due for the funny farm. And so I just made 3 ellipses and a query to indicate to me privately that that was the sortie on which we saw these objects. And I shall never forget it.
Some of the crew and passengers of a BOAC Stratocruiser reported seeing mysterious objects in the sky over the Atlantic. When the airliner arrived back in Britain, the pilot, Captain James Howard, was asked to describe these objects by our reporter, Peter Maggs.
When I look out of the left-hand window of the nose of a Stratocruiser, I see something like, with low clouds way beneath us, the sun had just set over here, and these objects appeared something like this. They were sometimes ahead of it, sometimes behind, and the shape of this object was continually changing. Sometimes one end would appear to disappear, sometimes this was very much larger, sometimes it was almost a V-shaped affair like this. It was always black in silhouette and always quite a clear edge to it.
And when it finally disappeared, it seemed to dissolve. Now, would you say that that's possible, some sort of optical illusion, or would you say it was an intelligently navigated craft?
To the passengers, and we were serving drinks, and we noticed there was some confusion in the cabin. Passengers were all looking out of the port side of the aircraft. I went to look too to see what was going on, looked through the window, and there we saw these 7 objects. The one very large one, which was black and solid looking, it kept changing shape. When we first saw it, it was pear-shaped, and then it was stretched out like a cigar, and then like an inverted telephone. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it did look absolutely solid. There were 6 little ones flying in formation, sometimes 3 in front and 3 behind, or 5 in front and 1 behind, but always 6, but changing formation. The passengers, of course, asked me what it was, and I had no idea. I went onto the flight deck and asked Captain Howard. When I got onto the flight deck, Captain Howard and the technical crew were also all looking through the window. And when I asked Captain Howard what it was, he simply said, "Well, I don't know, but for goodness sake, keep the passengers happy."
The entire crew and some of the passengers watched this object for 18 minutes, and it maintained station alongside us, some distance away, and I think there's no question that it was no illusion and that it was being intelligently handled.
Since 1948, there have been thousands of sightings by commercial and military flight crews.
March the 12th, 1977. I was flying a trip from San Francisco to Boston
now stopping at DC-10.
It was an Airbus 320, and we had 24 passengers on board with very good condition. We were at 39,000 feet.
We were just north of Dallas-Fort Worth. It was a beautiful, clear night.
Out of nowhere, some lights appeared. Looking over to the left of me, just to the north of me,
I noticed a red light of some kind to the far, the distance off our port side, our right side.
And Larry says, well, keep an eye on it. He says, well, now it's coming at us.
And they began a turn from pointing directly at us in an echelon sort of a turn away.
It was not a plane, it was not a weather balloon. It was huge, absolutely huge. It was dark red color. And so this object began to become transparent and it disappeared. It was absolutely crazy. Crazy.
It just was gliding through the sky so quietly, and as it did so, it blotted out the stars behind it. And it just reminded me of a submarine in the depths when it's quiet and just kind of motoring right on through, you know.
There were no wings, there were no windows, and it was cigar-shaped.
I saw what I saw, and this thing was not from here.
I watched this big, gigantic light go out behind our left wingtip, and then as the turn progressed, it disappeared in the distance off to the back at a very high rate of speed. I've flown all the jets. I flew in the war. I flew B-17s in the war. Everything. I've got over 30,000 hours of flight time and never had a sighting as that one. So it was once in a lifetime.
It's a statement by a senior airline pilot with years of flying experience, highly trained, and who has been regularly examined by medical experts.
Stefano Guerra, Swissair captain.
I was flying over the Alps, in the region of Biasca, at 5,000 meters, when I saw a light to the north, which a few seconds later I lost from my field of vision. I didn't manage to see it again. At that moment, another pilot was flying in an easterly direction, in the same area of the Alps, and asked radar if there was an object in the same place where I'd seen my object. It wasn't visible to radar control. The pilot said he saw a strange, unidentified form, which corresponded to the one I'd seen in my airspace. He couldn't explain it, and said apparently it was quite big, but clearly not an aeroplane.
Could it have been a meteorite?
No, because meteorites move, and this one was stationary. Probably the object didn't show on the ground radar at that point, because it wasn't moving like a normal aeroplane. It was an enormous area of white light, as big as 4 jumbo jets. According to both pilots, it stopped and then went away and was neither an aeroplane nor a meteorological phenomena.
Captain Schmidt, Swissair.
The radar station at Maastricht informed us that a UFO was proceeding in a northerly direction. It then turned towards us at a speed to 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers an hour, very fast indeed. Eventually it stabilized in relation to our position to 3 nautical miles to our right at 45 degrees. That's about 5 kilometers from us. We put on the headphones and looked to the right, and suddenly there was an immense flash in front of us. I hadn't seen anything like it. Very fast and very intense. The radio didn't give any signal. Nothing at all. Maastricht told us that the object stopped for a minute behind us and then went south at great speed. It was traveling 4 to 5 times the speed of sound. Later I read the report of the radar controller. After checking the data, he wrote the speed was double that, which means it was 10 to 12,000 kilometers an hour. It went away in a southerly direction. It returned and went away again. It was as if it was playing hide and seek with us. The UFO was enormous, very fast, and it was flying at 10 to 12,000 kilometers an hour. It was seen on radar and seemed to play with the airliner, not behavior that you would expect of a military or experimental aircraft. And this is how another Swissair pilot explained his experience.
Captain Peter Bircher, Swissair.
Suddenly the object, which had flown with us for a while, veered, and then at top speed disappeared, turning through 90 degrees. I think that this behavior would exclude a natural explanation of the phenomenon, since the object resembled no known flying object. It was practically suspended in the air in front of us. It then went away at high speed, veering at 90 degrees in relation to our route. No known flying object can do such a thing. Many civil pilots are reluctant to talk about their sightings of UFOs. They don't want to be ridiculed, and often they want to protect their flight crew. Military pilots are bound by official secrecy for the duration of their service.
Captain Duverstal, Swissair.
At first, we thought we were seeing a star, or at least we believe it to be a shooting star. But straight away I told myself that it wasn't possible because of its speed. It fell gently to the horizon and then oscillated a little to the left, and then to the right, and then left and right. It then returned to its original position. All of this in less than 30 seconds. That's far from normal. Have you spoken about this to military pilots? I've spoken to American military pilots in Alaska. They tell me that they've reported many strange things in those out-of-the-way places, but that they weren't allowed to discuss these things.
So you think that the military pilots know more than they can tell about UFOs? Have they also observed this kind of stuff and just can't speak about it?
Oh, sure.
Even with 20 years of flying experience to his name, Ray Bowyer wasn't sure he could believe what he was seeing. For a second opinion, he turned to the passenger sitting behind him.
I suggested to him, would you like to have a look and see what you can see? And straight away he said, yeah, I can see this. And about that time, he said, there's another one. Sure enough, almost directly beyond that one was a very similar looking object.
I sort of leant forward to look round the people in front and saw an orange lozenge-shaped light.
You know, if you look at a headlight at night, you don't see the edges of the light. You just see the center of the light and then a diffused glow.
Yeah, the second one appears to be beyond the first from where I am. It's exactly the same. It's got a gap. It's a cylindrical object, very bright yellow, and there's a gap in the light about 2/3 of the way along it.
I gave the air traffic controller that it was probably the size of a Boeing 737, thinking that it was about 5 or 10 miles away. But it would have appeared that from first sighting it was about 55 miles away. So that must have given it a massive size, really.
Kelly radioed the other aircraft under his control, asking if anyone could see the unidentified object.
We've got something about 8 o'clock resembling the description. Around about a similar range to Albany from us now.
The moment when another pilot said he could see something in the vicinity of Albany, it really it did make it much more interesting.
A call came in from a pilot corroborating the sighting. The objects had now been in sight for nearly 12 minutes. Ray Bowyer was concerned about getting his passengers onto the ground safely.
A-line 544, Roger, would you like to send?
Please, I better have to go down, I think.
It was getting to that point where I was pleased to descend and get on the ground.
When we landed, Ray turned around and said that he had seen something extraordinary. something he hadn't seen in his 20 years or so of flying. And he was quite obviously disturbed by the experience.
It's all quite strange. You phone up the phone number, which is the MOD, and you get an answer machine.
We're travelling back from Southampton to Alderney in a Trailander. I had noticed Ray looking out through the windscreen with his binoculars, which is quite unusual.
I saw Ray turn around and talk to someone behind him while we were flying. Now, it wasn't worrying from the standpoint of flying, but it was unusual. And he was gesturing to something down below.
On nearing the object, a second identical shape appeared beyond the first. Both objects were of a flattened disc shape with a dark area to the right. They were brilliant yellow with light emanating from within, and I estimated them to be up to possibly a mile across.
I pointed it out to John. He had to lean across me to be able to see it.
It was like that.
This was a big object in the sky, very, very big object. And I didn't want to be too close to it. So it was at that time anyway where we had to descend to land. And with both objects still visible and to a lot of the passengers in the back of the aircraft, we descended through the 2,000-foot haze layer and lost sight of it.
So Ray, why didn't you bring this to the attention of your passengers? I mean, normally when a pilot sees something of interest, he says, if you look out to your left, you'll see...
Yeah, New York.
Right, you know what I mean?
It was a little bit far away from here. Well, it was, I didn't want to alarm anybody at that point. There again, as we got closer to these objects, there was no hiding it. They were just there.
On the night of October the 24th, 1968, at Minot Air Force Base in Minot, North Dakota, Airman First Class Mike O'Connor was dispatched to make a routine repair at one of the missile sites.
We made our turn to come down the road to the missile site, and out of the corner of my eye, I observed what I thought was a farmer's yard light, but it looked awful bright. As we proceeded down the road, the object appeared to lift off the ground and parallel us down the road until we came to the missile site.
These objects would rise, they would speed up, they would slow it down, they would hover, they would dart very quickly one way or the other. We were just not really sure that these were things that we could explain.
Captain Brad Runyon was the B-52's co-pilot.
The air traffic controller asked us if we would mind going out to this one area and looking for something. I was curious, and I said, well, what are we looking for? And they said, well, you'll know it if you find it.
The navigator on the B-52, Captain Patrick McCaslin, suddenly identified an object on his radar screen.
I saw a return, faint one sweep, bright the next, large, off our right wing, 3 o'clock, at about 3 miles. And at that point, I asked the radar navigator to turn on the camera, which would then take pictures of whatever was on the radar screen.
These pictures of the radar screen show the object flying in formation with the B-52.
This thing was climbing out with us and maintaining the same heading we were. That was unusual. But what really watered my eyes when this thing backed away and allowed us to turn inside of it.
My estimate overall object was a minimum of 200 feet in diameter, and it was hundreds of feet long. It had a metallic cylinder attached to another section that was shaped like a crescent moon. I felt that this crescent moon part was probably the command center. I tried to look inside the thing, but all I could see was a yellow glow. At that point, I was fairly sure that I was looking at an alien spaceship, something that had come here from some other planet other than Earth.
Aviation pioneer Dick Russell's distinguished career includes 26 years as an air safety chairman and 5 years as spokesman for the Airline Pilots Association. He's flown virtually every passenger plane made since the DC-3. In the fall of 1956, Dick Russell was flying as a co-pilot when his flight captain pointed out the window.
And I looked up and I saw an object which was saucer in shape. It was approximately 50 or 60 feet in diameter. I was stunned and I said, "What is that?" And about that time, it zoomed across in front of my windscreen and stopped, and then flew off at about a 45-degree angle, very high speed. I said, "What in the world was that?" He said, "Well, now you've seen one." But he says, "You can't tell anybody because they think you're nuts."
Ridicule and humiliation have been a constant for pilots ever since they first began to report UFO sightings during the Second World War.
Pilots know now that you can make reports all day long and nothing will be done about it, nothing will be investigated. They'll take your report and they lose it immediately. Military pilots have made reports many times. They've chased them. They have been set out to chase it, to find out what they are. They come back with reports and it's as far as it ever goes.
In the early 1950s, Art Schaff was flying 7 passengers, including 2 officers, from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida to Louisville, Kentucky, when he had a spectacular sighting. The next day, Schaff was thoroughly debriefed.
There was a full colonel who was chief of intelligence, and he's the one that called me in. I found out later that everybody was called in that was on that flight, and everybody apparently saw the same thing. Back in those days, when more than one person had a sighting like this, they used mass hallucination as a possible answer to the whole thing.
Schaff had been the first to notice the strange orange light hovering alongside the plane. He quickly pointed it out to his co-pilot.
Out of nowhere, it's alongside of us. These 3 huge glowing balls in a triangle. And it stayed right with us as we pressed on. And the colonel said, "Art, turn into it." And I said, "Forget it." And he kept it up. So I very gingerly dropped my left wing into this, whatever it was, and it just took off like a streak.